Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elite members, thank you so much for your love and dedication. It does not go unnoticed, and it is reciprocated from myself to you. For the newbies, if you begin to like what you are hearing, go ahead and press that like and comment button, and go ahead and try that new hype feature. It really does help the channel out. And if you'd like to become part of the family, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and set your notification bell to all. That way you will be reminded of every time I upload a video. Please take a look at your screen here and wish everyone a happy birthday for November. From myself to you, I hope it's your very special day and a day that you never forget. May it be filled with love and joy and everything you want it to be. Happy November birthday of 2025. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm. And prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Creepy Backwoods Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. One quick disclaimer, this is my voice, this is not AI. I don't choose to use that AI crap. It's already saturating enough channels, and there's a lot of people that can't differentiate a real human voice versus an AI voice. If you listen very carefully, I do articulate my voice. I do take pauses and breaths where they are needed. And there's a lot of emotion in my voice when I actually read. So anyway, if you are in doubt, please know that I go live every single Friday. So you can catch me here on Back to Ashes on a live. Now, let's get back to our stories, shall we? About 20 years ago, me and an old mate of mine from school decided to go camping. We've been wanting to camp there for a while because it's one of the largest patches of ancient woodland in the whole of the UK. And since Ozzy and the boys recorded Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath at Clearwell Castle, it felt like a bit of a heavy metal pilgrimage. But while both me and my mate were fans of scary music, we both definitely didn't enjoy the little run-in that we had near the little pond we found. We used to camp out the back of my car, basically. So after driving up and down forest roads for a while, we found this little side path that ran adjacent to a large pond. There was enough room for us to park the car and still leave room for people to pass us on the path. So we thought that'd be as good of an idea as any to stop over for the night. Camping there wasn't strictly legal, but we were used to skirting a bit of bureaucracy so we could have a nicer campsite. We didn't make campfires anywhere like that, and we certainly didn't damage any trees or anything. We weren't vandals, so unless a real Jobsworth came along and threatened to call the police, we were generally free to do as we pleased. Anyway, we parked just off the path, set up our tents, and had some sandwiches for dinner. Then, after watching the sun go down, over a few beers and some songs on a portable player, we hit the hay with the intention of staying another night there. But when we woke up the next morning, my mate found a note on his car windshield that just said, "Leave." And I won't lie, we were definitely a bit creeped out knowing someone had been walking around our tents while we were asleep. But to be honest, it wasn't the first time something like that had happened. You get kids playing pranks, passive-aggressive note leavers, telling you if they've informed the National Trust or whatever, and even the occasional dogger who doesn't realize you're even there on the other side of a bush. And on this occasion, we thought it was most probably kids playing a joke on us. The note leavers are generally quite verbose, and they'll leave you a tidy little paragraph explaining why exactly you're so evil for camping on public land. The kids or teenagers trying to scare you will generally leave you a nice little "die" or "we are watching," or in this case, "leave." I asked my mate if he reckoned that we should relocate. even if it was just to the other side of the forest. And I sort of agreed with him when he said no. If the kids or teenagers came back, we'd chase them off and give them a scare of their own. All in good fun, of course, but we certainly weren't going to give them the satisfaction of obeying their single-word order. After that, we were planning on having a walk into the nearby town to get some food and see what pubs they had on offer. But after suggesting that whoever left the note might still be watching us, my mate suddenly wasn't so keen on leaving all of our stuff alone, and we decided to back away before driving into town to get some food. We found a decent pub, had some food and a swift half. And then, as we were set at the bar, my mate starts talking about going back into the forest and camping in a new spot. It did feel massively emasculating, having moved on at the behest of what were probably just some kids playing tricks on us. So to claw back a bit of our pride, we agreed to head back to the Forest of Dean to spend our final night of camping there. So after lunch, we drove back into the forest and repeated the process of driving up and down the little roads in an attempt to find the camping spot. Eventually, we found one, and this time we made sure it was much more secluded than the first. We weren't exactly scared yet, apprehensive of getting our stuff damaged or stolen, but not scared. But then, as we set up the tents and got our 6-packs of beer out of the car boot, my mate saw someone walking towards us down the track. First I heard of it was him going, "Hey, hey," in this whispered voice, and the second, "Hey," was said immediately after the first and sounded urgent in the extreme. I turned around fast and saw a man walking down the track towards us. He had a baseball cap on with a jumper, jeans, and boots, but covering his face from the eyes down with a scarf. And in his hand, he carried some big wood chopping axe with a red blade. We didn't try and talk to the guy, and I'm sad to say that I left about 100 pounds worth of camping gear and my beers behind. But we hopped into my car the second I saw him. Then, since we had to drive past this guy to actually make it back to the road, I gunned my car right at him, so he had to move and couldn't take a swing at us as we passed. We made an anonymous call to the police from the road, not wanting to give away that we'd been breaking the law, but also not wanting some masked psycho to get away with brandishing an axe at us. We assumed it was him that left that note too, but who he was and why he'd done it were things we were never able to work out. I suppose there are some proper weirdos out there, and we were always a bit more careful about where we camped right after that. During my time in college, I had a friend whose dad owned an 800-acre piece of land in eastern Texas. In the past, he had leased it out to hunters and paper companies, but he was no longer doing that. He had built a cabin on the land a few years before and would let us go out there from time to time just to mess around. It served as a great way to relax from the pressures of school and get closer to nature. The spring break of 1997, we loaded up our trucks and headed for the cabin. Our plans were to go shooting, drink beer, and do other things rednecks like us do in the woods. Our first morning kept us busy cleaning the cabin and moving all of our stuff inside. Around dinner time, we made a big fire outside and cooked a bunch of steaks and fried potatoes. We skipped dessert and broke open some beers. The sun went down not long after, and for the remainder of the evening, we got loaded and passed around a joint or two. At some point in the night, I heard a shuffling noise outside and went out to check on it. The fire was barely burning at that point, and just outside of its light, I swore I could see the shape of a man standing completely still. From what I could tell, he was facing me, perhaps waiting to see what I would do. I blinked my eyes really hard to get a clearer look, but my position and the lack of light made it too hard to see him clearly. The shape continued to stand still, so I decided I would walk a little closer in hopes of getting a better picture. The thought terrified me, but I was transfixed by the being, or perhaps I was still too intoxicated to make wise decisions. I took 2 steps forward, but was distracted by a voice behind me. My friend had woken up and noticed the door was wide open, so he got out of bed and saw me walking around the fire. His voice caused me to jump a little, but I soon realized who it was speaking. I asked him if he saw the figure on the other side of the fire pit. He just laughed at me and said I must be too stoned because I was seeing things. We laughed it off and returned to bed. On my way, I turned back to take one more look, but the shape was no longer there. I chuckled to myself and went back to sleep. The next morning, I wrote the whole experience off as the result of too much fun and went on with my day. We spent the first half of it fishing at the big pond. Post-lunch was shooting, and one guy brought a compound bow. The beers and smoke were broken out after dinner. A game of poker was attempted but soon canceled in favor of another evening telling lies around the fire. On one of my many trips to relieve myself that night, I was spooked by the sound of a stick breaking close by and hurriedly made my way back to the fire. The look of fear on my face made the other guys laugh their butts off. I tried to explain what had happened, but was quickly reminded that we were not the only creatures in these woods. The reasoning seemed sound, so I accepted it. Not long after, we were standing around, involved in some deep discussion, and I turned to speak to the guy on my left. What I saw caused me to clench up so tight I could have snapped a steel rod with my sphincter. Standing within a few steps behind my friend was another man I did not recognize. It was like he had appeared out of nowhere. What made it creepier was that he was staring intently at the back of his head, almost like he was trying to bore through it with his eyes. I remained frozen stiff. The longer I looked at him, I realized he was the same being I had seen lingering outside the light of the fire the night before. He was average height, with a long, unkempt beard. My friend continued rambling about whatever, unaware of his shadow. After several long seconds, the stranger turned to me with a blank expression and walked away. This was when my friend finally noticed my horrified look. When he spoke, the thrall of fear was released, and I began pointing and rambling about what I had just witnessed. He and my other friend laughed at me again. There was no way I was seeing things this time. I described the man, and one of them suggested that he was Bigfoot. Despite my protests, no one was buying it, and I eventually cut my losses and shut up. However, I was not beat. Their mockery had made me even more determined to prove the stranger's existence. The next 2 days were quiet. No stranger, in other words, but I kept my eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. By our 5th morning, I was beginning to question my own sanity. I had seen this mysterious man stalking around us twice, and now he had suddenly disappeared. I resolved to put my quest on the back burner until some new evidence arose. My friend's dad had mentioned to him that an owner of one of the surrounding properties had spotted a small group of wild hogs running through his land, and so we grabbed our rifles and went on the search for them. After a mile or so down one of the property's main roads, We came across some hog wallows and knew that we were on the scent. We went up the road, now on foot, tracking them. Another mile on, we stumbled upon 3 large hogs rooting up the ground and prepared to make bacon. 2 of us chambered rounds as quietly as possible on our rifles and took aim. I was less than a second from saying 3 and pulling the trigger when the loud crack of another rifle filled the air, followed closely by a burst of wood and bark above my friend's head. It took a moment for it to register that someone else was shooting at us. A few seconds later, another crack and strike, this time even closer to my friend. We weren't going to wait for a third. My friend, who appeared to be the target, led us down the side trail that led back to the cabin. No more shots followed as we fled. However, instead of finding safety at the camp, the shots began again. Seeing no other option, we hopped into my truck and hauled out of there. This was a time just before the commonality of cell phones, so we had to drive the 20 miles to town to get help. After we explained the situation, we returned to the property a few hours later with some deputies. We approached slowly and remained in the cars when we parked. We waited to see if the shots would start again, but nothing happened. A cursory look around counted 3 holes in the cabin and another 2 in my buddy's windshield. Perhaps the worst part was that all of our camping stuff, sleeping bags and such, were spread out all over the ground. Luckily, we had smoked everything the night before. Nothing was missing but a box of 30-30 ammo and, strangely, my sleeping bag and wool blanket. A theory began to form in the deputies' minds that we had stumbled upon a squatter or poacher camping out on the property. For whatever reason, they acted as if they were going to let it go. But once my friend's dad, who owned the land, heard about it, he put pressure on them to start a search. This was about the time I repeated my story of seeing someone lurking around the cabin. No one was laughing now, and my story was finally being taken seriously by somebody. The search was led around the property by my friend's dad. School had already begun again by the time it took place. It continued for a full week, but nothing other than a few old camps was found. It was assumed that he knew the heat would be on him after the shooting incident and moved on. During the course of the investigation, several avenues were followed to ID the stranger, like escape cons, but he remains unidentified to this day. Because of the chance of another attack, our trips to the property ended the next year. We tried to camp out somewhere else, but it wasn't the same, and our nature getaways died out. Within 5 years, my friend's dad had a heart attack and lost interest in the cabin. The paper company's lease was renewed, and the land's trees have been used to make paper and pulpwood products ever since. Each time I jot down a quick note, I'm reminded of our awesome trips and especially the odd and terrifying week that caused them to stop. I do once or twice a year talk to my old college friend on the phone. As far as he has heard, that crazy stranger still has not been caught. We sometimes theorize as to his origins and where he may have ended up. I, however, often take this much further. When I'm alone, I wonder why our so-called stranger seems to focus on so much of his anger onto my friend. And perhaps far more concerning, is he still out there waiting for his chance to finish what he began all those years ago? This is a true story, and I've been obsessing over what happened out there. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible without leaving out any key details. My wife's uncle, Jay, bought some land north of Spokane, Washington, with a friend of the family named Kay. They got it at a significant discount because a nearby aluminium smelter had polluted the ground, making it impossible to use the water beneath the surface. They had set up 2 plots, and each had a camper to live in. Jay had been getting progressively more paranoid, saying people were stalking him and watching him from the trees. About 3 months into living there, a man wandered through the woods and had an interaction with Jay that ended with the man attacking him and breaking his jaw. Upon being arrested, the man said he had been overcome with the desire to see if he could kill him. 2 months later, Jay was murdered in his sleep on the couch in his camper. Kay found him and immediately ran away as far as he could before stopping to call the police. There was significant evidence of who did it, and they quickly caught the killer, a 19-year-old boy who said he just simply wanted Jay's bike. He beat him to death with a power tool that was lying on the floor nearby, completely bashing his brains in. Kay was now completely terrified at all times to be out there alone. He moved in with a family member until 8 months later. He ended up with nowhere else to go and had to return. In constant fear, he finally convinced my pregnant wife and me to come stay with him. The second I turned off the highway into the property, I was overcome with dread. There were at least 250 crows covering the dirt road up to the property. I didn't sleep whatsoever that first night. I just stared into the forest, searching for the cause of this intense fear. The energy of this place was so uncomfortable, and I just assumed it was simply because Uncle Jay had been killed here. Even the days were eerie. Never did I have a moment where I didn't feel watched. My wife and I always had that sense of fear, especially after dark. Things sort of normalized for a while until one day Kay began puking and feeling very lightheaded all the time. I took him to the hospital, and they said he was probably fine, possibly just the flu. At this point, it was the anniversary of Jay's murder. 3 days after the date of Jay's death, Kay came running out of his camper, screaming that he couldn't breathe. This woke my wife and me up, and we ran out to see what was wrong. Kay had gotten into his car and floored it, crashing into a tree nearby. I ran up to peer through the window and saw the most intense and primal fear that I've ever seen in someone's eyes. He was gasping and clutching his chest. Moments later, he let out a breath one last time, and then he was dead. I attempted to give him CPR for 30 minutes until EMS arrived. On July 10th, 1 year and 3 days after moving there, Jay and Kay were both dead. Now it was only my wife and me, alone on the property, living in fear and not understanding what had happened out here. I still don't know why we didn't leave right away. One day, I came out to get fresh water from the drum we kept for water. The smell was the worst smell that I've ever smelled. The water container had a 1-inch opening on the top, and inside the water were bits and pieces of chipmunks, like spines and heads. They didn't just fall in. Something had to have ripped them apart before putting them inside. The nights got worse and worse. I never saw anything, just always filled with unease and intense fear. I grew up in the deep mountains of North Idaho, with the nearest town being 30 miles away, so being in the woods, even at night, was nothing new for me. But hearing crashing and footsteps every single night was unnerving. One night, my wife and I returned home to have the worst feeling that I've ever felt yet. Everything looked different, although everything was right where we left it. Nothing seemed in place. Looking around, I suddenly saw this orange, long-haired, mangy cat sitting on a stump. Its eyes were very intense, fiery, almost glowing, but not quite. We then started hearing branches snapping and pine needles crunching, seemingly from every direction. I was just staring at this cat, almost frozen in fear, when suddenly a voice broke out, echoing through the forest. "Hello? Anyone out there?" It sounded almost like a little girl, but something was off. My wife yelled back, "Hello? Are you okay? Anybody?" The voice had changed. "Help me! Help me!" We yelled back several times without a response. Then, "Somebody can help me?" followed by the most intense, shrieking, evil-sounding voice. I was now filled with more intense fear than I can ever describe. But my wife was overcome with a need to find this person. She started heading off into the forest without a word. I grabbed her arm, telling her something wasn't right. Why wouldn't this person respond to us? She continued to break free and run off alone into the woods. I told her to get back into the truck. I'd grab the spotlights. But we weren't going on foot. Thankfully, I convinced her. We rolled down the windows and shone my intense bright LED lights throughout the forest. We slowly crept down the road, yelling back, still not getting any kind of a response. As we got further down the road, a voice spoke out yet again. "Please, will anyone help me?" Sounds are difficult to pin down in the woods, but this one was now very close. I hit the brakes and stopped immediately. We shone the lights and yelled back, continuing our search. No sign of anyone. Suddenly, the voice exploded into the cabin of the vehicle, as if they were standing right outside my window. "Help me! Can you help me?" It left my ears hurting and ringing. I hit the gas and didn't look back. I called the police as soon as we hit the highway, and afterwards, when they reached back out after checking it out for themselves, they said no one was out there. No one was around. I went back the next day to get our stuff. My wife ended up giving birth the following day. We never stayed out there again. After the baby was born, what the hell could do those kinds of things? I never even believed in the paranormal before, but now, I don't know how else to explain it all. I hadn't planned on going out there. It was a Friday. Work was dead, my phone was quiet, and I didn't have anybody to answer to that weekend. I looked around my apartment, the laundry piled up in the corner, the same TV show droning on, and I felt like I just kind of needed some air. I couldn't handle another night in the hamster wheel. So I threw my gear in the truck, stove, tent, bag, a little hatchet that I kept in the living room, a couple of tarps, a cooler full of beer, and gas station grade food. Nothing fancy. I didn't really pack like a responsible adult, just kind of grabbed what I thought I would want and figured everything else would work itself out. You know, the American way. I headed out of town in the late afternoon, pointed the truck toward the highway. Once you're 20 or 30 minutes past the last grocery store, it starts to actually feel like you're slipping off the edge of the map. By the time you're 2 hours out, the radio goes to static, and it's just tree line after tree line, cattle fences, dirt roads in the sky. I kept driving. Eventually, I cut off the main road onto this older service road. It wasn't marked, and there weren't any signs, just a pair of ruts that went off through the trees. I'd been down plenty of roads like that before on hunting trips, and figured I'd find a pullout and call it good. I wasn't trying to backpack 10 miles in or anything. I just wanted to be where nobody else would bother me. But the thing is, I was not alone back there. Once I got deep enough, I started spotting little pop-up camps tucked off the road. You know the kind. Beat-up old tents, folding tables, tarps strung between trees, a smoke ring of rocks that may or may not be legal depending on the time of year. Weekend people. You see kids on bikes, somebody's dog trotting along off the leash, a guy sitting in a lawn chair drinking beer like he's at a tailgate party. And one of those guys flagged me down. He was older, late 60s, maybe 70s, with a really sunburned face, what my father called tackle box skin, and long gray hair. He stepped out almost right in front of my truck and lifted up his hand, so I slowed and rolled the window down. "Evening," he said, grinning at me. "Getting out of here at the perfect time." "Yeah, is that right?" I said. He leaned in a little closer, sitting there in my truck. I'd admit it was very weird. "You're all clearing out," he said. "You want quiet? I'll give you a spot that nobody bothers you." I don't know why I listened to him. Maybe it was confidence or something else. I don't know. "Look, keep on this road," the old-timer said. "You'll see this cattle gate on the left. It's not locked, just chained. Go through. After that, it's a little tight, but don't stop. You'll come to a pond. The east side's firm, the west side's soft. Camp on the east side. Nobody will see you." Then he winked at me. "Perfect weekend to be alone." I thanked him, tapped on the door, and rolled on. The gate was in fact right where he had said it was. Rusted, chain looped, but not locked. I unhooked it, drove through, and latched it behind me. The trail narrowed to 2 dusty ruts under branches that scraped the sides of my truck. The further I went in, the quieter it seemed to get. No wind, not even birds. Then I saw a small pond reflecting in the trees. Dead snags leaning over across the water. And beside it was a flat little clearing that looked like it was made for one tent. Somebody had definitely camped there before. Stones in a ring, black with old ash. A few logs dragged into place. Hidden off from the road, invisible unless you knew where you were looking. I only glimpsed a flash of it, to be honest. So I parked, hauled in my gear, and set up my camp. There was a nice 20-foot gap between the truck and my tent. This little gulch kept me from driving in completely. It felt perfect. The kind of night that made me want to get drunk all by myself. I didn't really waste any time. I got a fire going before dark, cracked open a beer, and cooked my dinner. Hot dogs, chili, and a bag of chips. I hung my Bluetooth speaker from a tree branch and played an old podcast, some kind of true crime show that I downloaded before. The voices sounded oddly comforting out there, too. And I told myself, I'm only going to have a couple more beers before bed. But time slips when you're the only one awake for miles. By full dark, the fire had burned tall and hot, throwing light high into the trees. I could see my breath in the cool air, hear the crackle of the logs, and sometimes other noises too. A shuffle off in the brush, a snap behind the tent, a faint splash from the pond. Nothing close enough to see, but close enough to notice it. It's the wildlife, I told myself, because it always is, right? I listened to the speaker get louder, laughed at the hosts, and drank one more beer, then another. Around 11, I stumbled into my tent and crashed. I didn't even bother killing the fire or turning off the podcast. I didn't even take off my hoodie. I was asleep in seconds. I awoke, however, to pressure on my sleeping bag. It took me a second to understand that it wasn't just me. Something warm was pressing up against me. Heavy, slow-moving, breathing. My first thought was a deer, then a human. I froze. I was still drunk, but I knew something was wrong. The air smelled awful. Wet rot, mildew, decay. I tried to listen, tried not to move, but my pulse was hammering so loud, it kind of drowned everything else out. Whoever it was, they were lying right up against my side, thigh to thigh. I could feel every inhale. I didn't really think. I just kind of rolled hard and yanked the zipper, dove out barefoot into the dirt, and sailed right through the tent flap. The fire was embers now, my flashlight being jerked across the tree line in the dim fabric. No one called me out. No sound at all except my own ragged breathing. Okay, I guess maybe I dreamed it. I was drunk, so I passed out and just imagined the whole thing. But holy shit, it was terrifying. Then I took note of something moving behind the light. A soft step in the dry needles. I froze again. I heard another step, and then nothing. I checked the immediate area with my flashlight and found nothing. So I quickly decided it was time to go back to bed. I knew I'd tied on a pretty good one, drank far more than usual, and had fallen asleep with my tent unzipped. I figured a skunk or a raccoon had found its way in, followed the scent of chili and Fritos on my hands and breath. It made sense in my late-night drunken stupor. When morning finally broke, the world looked normal again. The birds, the sunlight, the calm pond. I laughed to myself. It really must have been a nightmare. And I went to relight the fire for breakfast and roast some more dogs. My speaker was now sitting on the table instead of hanging up in the tree. My firewood was now stacked in this strange pattern, sticks laid out in a weird formation, like somebody else had been arranging them. In fact, everything was moved around to some degree. In the tree line, I saw him. He stood there motionless, watching me. At first, I thought it was the same man from the road that had told me about this very spot. Same age, maybe. But this one looked a lot more feral. His beard was long and matted. His hair was a filthy nest. His clothes were nothing but tied strips of garbage bags and torn rags. His eyes looked vacant, dead gray, and he looked like he hadn't spoken to another person in years. Hey, I called out. He didn't even blink. Sir, are you okay out there? Still nothing. He stepped forward, one jerky movement at a time, arms twitching at his sides. I took a step back. He continued to come closer. It felt like I was watching some kind of zombie from a movie. All right, that's close enough. Just stop right there, I shouted. I still didn't get any kind of reaction, though. I quickly snatched up the hatchet from the stump. All right, you come any closer and I swear to God. Still nothing. Just that blank stare as he continued to march straight for me. In that moment, I realized I might actually have to kill this guy. I ran to the truck and grabbed my pistol from the glove box, fired one round into the dirt, and the shot echoed off all the trees. That got him to stop. He flinched and then spat into the dirt, turned his back to me, and stood there. Stood still. Hell, frozen solid, just facing away like he was waiting for something to happen. I kept the gun on him for what felt like forever. The guy still wasn't moving, not even swaying. That's when I realized there were footprints in the dirt between us. My campsite was now covered in them. Bare feet, long strides, toes dug deep into the dust. He'd been walking around and through my campsite for a while, maybe even all night. This time, I didn't wait for him to move again. I kept my gun trained while I backed away toward the camp, tossing my gear into the truck one piece at a time. Tent, cooler, sleeping bag. The whole time he stayed right there at the tree line, back to me. When I went to grab my pack from the tent, a smell hit me again. That damp chemical human smell. The inside was telling. My blanket pushed aside, sleeping bag twisted, dirt smeared across the floor like something had crawled in it. The clothing and fabric on the tent floor was covered in dark stains, clearly human-shaped, and there were handprints on the side of my sleeping bag. I nearly threw up at the sight. That's what I felt that night. This psycho had crawled into my tent and spooned me. I slammed the tailgate shut and got behind the wheel. The old man still hadn't moved. I started the engine, half expecting him to turn around, but he didn't. He stayed there, motionless, the tangle of black plastic rustling in the morning breeze. As I drove off, I caught one last look in the mirror. He was crouching now, really low to the ground, picking through the dirt where I'd been standing. I couldn't even see what he was doing, gathering up things, maybe small bits that I'd left behind. But it looked very, very important for him for some reason. When I reached the main road, I chained the gate behind me and didn't even look back. A ranger told me that there were all kinds of bizarre reports from out there. The land had been some kind of condemned federal property. Old mine shafts, chemical dumpings, toxic runoffs. Nobody should have been out there at all. He said the locals call it the basin. He also told me a few people still lived out there, if you call it that. And charming that I got to meet one of them. The creepiest and most frightening story I know didn't come from a John Carpenter movie or a Stephen King book. It came from a little old lady that I met out on a hike one day near Cross Timbers Park here in Kansas. I was in my late 30s, and hiking had become my way of taking a break from the daily grind. I liked the quiet, the way it cleared my head and kept me grounded. So, one warm afternoon in late spring, I decided to drive up to the state park to hit the trails and work off some stress. That day, the park was dead silent, and I felt like I was the only one around for miles. I'd been walking for a couple of hours, following a trail near the edge of the park that wound past little clearings, when I stumbled upon something I wasn't expecting. In a small meadow surrounded by trees, with the late afternoon sunlight poking through them, I found 4 graves. The headstones were old and beat up, leaning a bit like they were worn out from standing there so long. I got closer, brushing away some tall grass to read them. The names were faded and tough to make out, but I could tell they were all from the same family, brothers and a father, it looked like. There was nothing weird about family being buried right next to each other, especially back then. But the thing that really caught my eye and sent a little shiver down my spine was how they all had the same date of death, April 7th, 1859. I remember standing there staring at those stones, wondering what could have taken out a whole family in just one day. Was it a sickness of some kind? Maybe some kind of accident, or was it something darker? My curiosity got nothing, and I couldn't help but hang around, trying to figure it out. Then, as I was poking around the graves, I heard footsteps crunching behind me. I turned and I saw a woman walking across the meadow toward me. She looked to be in her late 50s, and, without trying to sound mean, she didn't look like she took care of herself too well. She looked sharp, though, and had this serious, determined look in her eyes as she approached. She asked why I was trespassing on her land. When I assured her that I didn't mean to, and that I was just interested in the graves, she softened up a little. I told her I was just hiking through the park, and I guess I had strayed off the trail a bit too far. Then I told her my name and said it was a pleasure to meet her. That made her smile. After telling me her name was Martha, she said she was the great-great-granddaughter of one of the men buried there. Hearing that was kind of exciting, I guess, because it meant there was a chance she knew what happened to them. Then, when I asked as delicately as possible, by the way, it almost seemed like she'd been waiting for someone to show some interest in them. Without me asking too much, she launched into the story of her doomed forefathers, a tale her family had passed down for years. And let me tell you, that juice was well worth the squeeze. She started by explaining the times her great-great-grandfather lived in. They called it Bleeding Kansas back then, a messy, violent period when people were fighting over whether Kansas would be a free state or slave state. Her great-great-grandfather, a guy named Ezekiel, found his family caught up in that. And back then, the state of Kansas was flooded with weaponry. The New England Immigrant Aid Company would send what appeared to be crates of Bibles to the Free Starters. The crates were actually filled with sharp rifles, or what they called Beecher's Bibles back then. The slavers got shipments too, mostly from pro-slavery supporters from Missouri, but also from sympathizers in the wider South. It was like a practice round for the Civil War, which came a few years later. And it was complete chaos, too. So, a lot of those shipments I mentioned didn't make it into the hands of those they were intended for. Which brings me nicely to the fly-by-night firearm traders that were roaming around, selling stolen or misplaced weapons to anyone with a few bucks to buy them. Ezekiel, I was told, had gone into the woods one day to meet one such rifle salesman. He wanted rifles and shotguns to keep his family safe from the slavers that might raid his family farm. But since he didn't have the time to ride all the way into Coffeyville or Lawrence to visit an established gun store, he took a chance with the man in the woods. But after heading out into the trees, poor old Ezekiel never made it back home. His father and brothers started to get worried about him, so off they went into the woods to find him. But then, instead of bringing home their kin alive and well, all they found was his body. Zeke wasn't just dead either. He was torn up real bad, mutilated like something unholy had been done to him. Martha said she was told that it looked like some kind of ritual, though she'd never been told the gorier details. I could picture it, though, at least in my imagination. And boy, did it give me the creeps. As you can imagine, Zeke's family didn't just let it go. They swore a terrible and bloody revenge against the people who murdered him. They heard a guy in the next town over was selling rifles in the exact same way, organizing meetups in the woods. So Ezekiel's pa and brothers rode out there to track him down. They asked around and got the townsfolk to tell them where the salesman was hiding, and then headed into the woods to get revenge. But just like Ezekiel, they didn't come back. A couple of days later, someone found their horses tied to some trees near an old wooden church that had been left to rot. A search party went out, found the fallen down church, and then they searched the place to rule out the missing men being inside. But when they stepped inside, there they were, lying on the rotted wood planks with the bodies of Ezekiel's father and brothers. It appeared they'd shot each other, dead, but no one could figure out why or how it happened. Martha said the county sheriff got called in, who brought his bloodhounds to the church. The dogs sniffed out the trails of the 3 dead men, but there was a 4th scent, someone they couldn't identify. The sheriff and his deputies then followed the 4th trail through the woods until it led to an old cave. But the bloodhounds, who were usually bold as brass, wouldn't go near it. They just whimpered and backed off like they were scared of whoever or whatever was inside. The deputies checked it out anyways, and all they found were some old clothes and animal bones. There was no sign of the 4th person. I remember how, when she got to that part of the story, Martha stopped talking for a few moments as her gaze wandered off, like she was seeing that cave in her mind's eye. Then she told me what she thought happened. In theory or not, what she said sent a chill right through me. When she said she believed her forefathers ran into the devil himself, she was dead serious. She believed this thing of evil tricked them into killing each other by feeding them lies. She thought about it long and hard, and she couldn't think of anything else that properly explained it. Her forefathers were good men, she said, but that's all they were. Men. Martha then quoted a Bible verse about how men were vulnerable to the devil's ways, saying, "Many a victim has he laid low, and all his slain are a mighty throng." I wasn't sure what to think. I asked if there could have been another explanation or if there was some kind of family feud she didn't know about. She just shook her head and said that she knows the devil walks the earth, looking for people who are weak and angry. Her family was both, she reckoned, grieving Ezekiel and out for blood. According to her, it made them easy pickings. I didn't argue with her. I could see she believed it with all her heart. And honestly, the story was heavy enough without me trying to poke holes in it. 4 guys from one family, all gone in such a brutal way. Devil or no devil, it was pretty messed up. And we stood there by the graves for a while, not saying much of anything, just taking it all in. Then, as the sun started to go down, I thanked her for telling me the story, and she gave me a small, sad smile in response. She said it mattered to keep their memory alive, that they didn't deserve what happened to them. I nodded in agreement, thanked her again for the story, and then said my goodbyes and got back to the trail. I tried to focus my mind elsewhere, trying to figure out how long it would take before I was back home and preparing dinner. But no matter how much I tried, I could not stop thinking about Martha's story. And the more I thought about it, the more the woods didn't quite feel the same anymore. Before, they'd been peaceful, but now it felt like they were hiding something. In the days that followed, I thought about Ezekiel heading into the woods to buy those guns, just trying to keep his family safe in a crazy time. I also thought about his father and brothers, torn up over losing him, and then going after the guy they thought did it. Something went very, very wrong in that church. Something bad enough for them to turn their guns on each other, but how? Was it the salesman? Did he mess with their heads somehow? Or was it something else? Something more in line with what Martha said about them, dealing with the devil? That cave part nagged at me too. Who was that fourth person? Was the salesman working alone, or was there someone else involved? And why the hell did those dogs freak out so much? Those old clothes and the animal bone had to be a clue too. But to what? I had no idea. Maybe the rifle salesman was a crook, luring people to rob them, or worse. And then he could have set up Ezekiel's family somehow and got them to fight each other. But that didn't explain the cave or the dogs acting spooked. Not to mention Ezekiel's body being all cut up like it was. That made it sound more like the work of some bloodthirsty lunatic than a straight-up robbery. Martha's devil idea was way out there, but I understood why she chose to believe it. Back then, with all the chaos and death, people probably saw the devil everywhere. He was an easy way to explain the unexplainable. Personally, I wasn't sold on it, but I couldn't shake that idea. And even now, I sometimes find myself picturing it in my head. Ezekiel meeting that salesman, the family finding his body, the shootout in the church, and the cave with its secrets. I didn't have answers, and maybe I never would. But that connection in the past, those lives lost in a place I had just walked through, it hit me hard. And that was enough to keep me thinking about it for a long, long time. My name is Dr. Fernando Castillo, and for 17 years I worked for the National Parks Administration here in Argentina. I was posted all over the country, but most of my time was spent in a place known as Gran Chaco, El Rancho Chaco, or the Chaco Plains, as you might call them in English, in an area of semi-arid lowlands spanning several countries here in South America. It's a mix of savannas and thorn scrub, but also subtropical forests, palm groves, and wetlands. And it is home to thousands of unique and rare species of plants and animals. It is an incredibly beautiful place, but since the 1970s, the region has been plagued by illegal logging and forest fires set by cattle ranchers who want more area for their cattle to graze. In my final year of employment, Gran Chaco lost tens of thousands of hectares of forest. And I've seen the heartbreaking effects of men's greed with my own two eyes. But I've also seen far, far worse things in the forests of Gran Chaco. And all of them, this is the one that haunts me the most. During the late summer of 1991, I was out doing some survey work around 20 miles north of a little town called Puerto Esperanza. After crossing a long and desolate patch of flat scrubland, I reached a section of forest composed of agadobo and pink trumpet trees. The agadobo are particular favorites of illegal loggers, so I wanted to make sure that this forest was untouched by their hands. Now, I spent around an hour walking around, making notes and marking the areas on my map. And then, once I was happy that the forest was in good condition, I started making my way back towards where I'd left my ATV. Gran Chaco is a very wild place, meaning many of the forests do not have any well-defined trails or paths to walk on. Even if they did, the nature of my work means I have to walk places that are infrequently traveled. So sometimes I lose my footing among the many roots and fallen branches. And this trip was no different. Most of the time, I merely stumble when catching my foot on something. But on this occasion, I caught my foot immediately after hopping over a thick branch, which had fallen among some knee-high grass. I was totally unprepared for the second impediment and completely off balance. So, after my foot caught, I was sent tumbling into the grass in front of me with a very loud crunch. Notice how I described it as a crunch, not a thud, because I didn't fall directly into the dirt and grass. Something broke my fall, something hard but kind of brittle. I didn't check to see what it was at first because my priority was to inspect the fresh grazes on my forearms and elbows. But then, after picking myself up, I saw that I hadn't landed on a pile of fallen branches. I'd landed almost directly on a pile of bones. Since jaguars are very active in Gran Chaco, I initially thought that the bones must have belonged to a jaguar kill, perhaps a deer or some type of pig. But upon further inspection, I found that they were too large to be a pig of any kind, and too much like a monkey to be a deer. The forests are home to howler monkeys too, so when I saw bones that looked remarkably like those of a human hand, I thought they belonged to some dead monkey. But when I saw the skull, and there was no mistaking things anymore, I had landed on a human skeleton, one that was filthy and moth-eaten. And when I realized that, a powerful feeling of mortal dread came over me. I picked myself up and crossed myself before brushing myself off. Unfortunately, that wasn't the first time that I had found a human body hidden among the wilds of Gran Chaco. But it was the first time that I had found spontaneously, as in not on a search, and the first that I found in such a terrible state of decomposition. I carefully flattened some of the grass around it, and then walked around it in a circle, studying it as I went. It looked like it had been there a long time, like the ground was already in the process of swallowing it up with dirt and grass. But then, as I walked, I stood on something else that felt hard under my foot, and, on closer inspection, I found a second skeleton just feet away from the first. It's hard to describe the feeling of abject terror one feels upon viewing human remains, unless you yourself have experienced the same sensation. But to see two sets of human remains in such quick succession, it made me fear for my life. It made me wonder what had happened there for two people to lose their lives in almost the same spot. And the dread that I felt was only amplified when I found the third skeleton, and then the fourth, and then the fifth. I came to realize that there were human remains for hundreds of meters in every direction. And every couple of meters, I saw the eyeless sockets of a skull as they stared back at me from the undergrowth. And this was no ancient indigenous burial site either, as some of the remains came complete with half-rotted boots or sneakers lying close by. The place was a cemetery without graves, and I feared that whatever fate had befallen these poor souls would soon befall me. I left that place as quickly, but carefully as I could, not wanting to disturb any more of human remains, and then drove straight back to the place my group was headquartered in, Puerto Esperanza. When I told our station staff what I'd seen, he demanded we drive back out into Gran Chaco so he could see it for himself. He didn't think I was lying or mistaken. He just simply wished to see such a thing for himself. And when we arrived, he was just as horrified as I was. Before we departed, he said a prayer for the dead together. And after that, it was out of our hands as the federal police stepped in to carry out their investigation. They are Argentina's equivalent of the FBI, and in coordination with our group from the National Park Administration, they were able to paint a picture of what had happened to the many lost souls that we found. From around 10 years in the 1970s and 1980s, the Argentine government collaborated with several other South American countries for what was called Operation Condor. Condor was the code name given to the tactics of anti-communist repression that these countries employed. And then, along with jailing activists and assassinating politicians, the Argentine security services began what became to be known as Los Vuelos de la Muerte, or in English, the death flights. And this is when they would load a dozen prisoners onto the airplane or helicopter, fly them out into the middle of nowhere, and then throw them out of the aircraft to disappear them. Thousands of people were murdered this way, and to this day, many of their bodies have never been recovered. But as much as I am proud to have helped return many lost souls to their rightful resting places, there are still many more who remain missing. And although I am happy to have helped reunite these poor people with their lost grieving families, I'm haunted by the sight of what became of them. And some nights, I dreamed that I too am being thrown to my death from the hold of an airplane. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true, creepy backwoods stories. I'd like to take a moment and thank the rest of the membership of BackToAshes. Thank you all so much for your continuous dedication and support. I do see it. It does not go unnoticed. And as I always like to say, without you, I would not have a voice. This channel would not exist, and I would just be sitting here talking to the void. Thank you so much for keeping BackToAshes going. I deeply appreciate you. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please stay vigilant and please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.